Well, the battle for Chasiv Yar comes as talk of a negotiated end to the war has risen, with Donald Trump back in the White House seeking a deal between Kyiv and Moscow. For some analysis on this, I'm joined now live by Michael Bossaque, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Hello to you, and thanks for speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Look, Volodymyr Zelensky this week has suggested that he is perhaps interested in direct talks with Vladimir Putin, something previously he's been clear that he doesn't want to do. What do you think has changed his mind?
Well, I think, it's the Russian gains, as Gulliver pointed out, but also the losses on the Ukrainian side. I mean, just before coming on live with you, I walked past a military funeral. I think there were about 3 or 4 hearses there, but my goodness, you could just really, really feel, of course, the pain and the suffering from those left behind, the relatives. But if you take that and multiply it by many, I've been to many cemeteries around Ukraine, and the numbers of losses on the Ukrainian side are absolutely horrendous. So there's enormous pressure on Mr. Zelensky to go to the negotiating table. But having said that, he cannot agree to any terms that Mr. Putin puts forward. And just quickly, those terms, to remind your viewers, are, to Russia to hang on to the areas it already controls, but to also take 2 more oblasts, to have a demilitarized zone, and for peacekeepers, and also for Ukraine to give up its NATO bid. I don't think any Ukrainian president can agree to those extortionate terms.
Well, as you say, I mean, these are pretty serious terms that Vladimir Putin is likely to impose, but Russia is also making quite significant progress on the battlefield, as we've been reporting. So is Moscow actually interested, do you think, in talks right now?
I don't think they are. And you're right. I mean, if they do make certain advances, they're actually getting closer to Kramatorsk, which is a very, very big military logistics hub for the Ukrainians. So I think that Mr. Putin, it's difficult to get into his head, but I think he feels he's in a superior position right now. And, let's face it, he has the luxury of not worrying about how many losses on his side. He doesn't worry about any opposition. He doesn't worry about the Russian economy or sanctions. So the Ukrainian president does not have that luxury. So, and I think what also is going to happen, and I know we may bring Mr. Trump into the conversation, but I don't think he's also in a position to really listen to Mr. Trump and say, well, you have to give up this and this for this war to end. So it's a very uncertain, dark time for Ukraine right now, I think.
Well, as you suggest, we can't really talk about this question of a deal for Ukraine without talking about the man back in the White House, Donald Trump. He clearly does want a deal, whether Putin or Zelensky do. And he has suggested, hasn't he, that he may well cut military aid to Ukraine, given you're in Kyiv. Give us a sense of, if he does that, the kind of impact it might have.
Well, look, I can tell you I just came from a meeting where the cuts to USAID were discussed, to USAID, and those cuts are already having immediate effects here on the ground in Ukraine. We're talking about probably thousands of Ukrainians being laid off from various programs that are funded by USAID. We're talking about school bomb shelters that are not going to build. We are talking about ordinary civilians who aren't going to be taught how to avoid mines. And the reason I bring up these examples, Nadia, is because these are going to be decisions made by Mr. Trump's administration that are going to affect the human lives on the ground here, as they will around the world. So the military aid, of course, would be a game changer, because Ukraine will run out of ammunition and other equipment very, very quickly, including those long-range ATACMS missiles. So I think, just quickly, what may happen is Mr. Trump may go to Mr. Putin and say, this is the deal that I envision. Mr. Putin will politely say, no, thank you. And it could motivate, because remember how transactional Mr. Trump is, Mr. Trump to say, OK, Ukraine, we're going to arm you to the teeth, finish off the job. But that all remains to be seen.
Indeed, as you say, Donald Trump is an unpredictable character. But just finally then, given everything that you've said, your analysis, what do you view the chances are of there being actual sit-down talks between the Ukrainian and the Russian leadership, let's say, this year?
Well, look, if we go back quite some time ago to talks between the Israelis and Palestinians, they actually did sit down and they came to a deal. And these were, two sides that grew up with generations of hatred. So, and we also have to remember that at the start of the war, the Russians and Ukrainians were actually meeting, whether it was in Belarus or in Turkey. So those talks could happen. I don't see right away Mr. Putin, Mr. Zelensky being across from each other. I think you're going to have preliminary talks. And then, there's the other factor as well. Saudi Arabia, for instance, is taking a much bigger interest in the war in Ukraine. They've offered to host a peace summit. So that may produce a result independent of whatever happens in the White House, in a very, very unpredictable White House.
Michael Bossack, it's been great to talk to you today live from Kyiv. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.